Hi everyone, it's Margot. I hope you're doing well. For today's episode, as you can see in the title, today's episode will be an interview with the director Anthony Chen. Yeah, I know. I'm so happy to be able to share with you this interview because this interview was very, very interesting. Quickly, I will just give you some of the main points of the interview. In the first part, we talked about Anthony Chen's career and we mainly focused around his latest movie, that is The Breaking Ice. The movie will soon be airing in France and as well in other parts of the world. The Breaking Ice is a movie that I really loved. I watched it 2 times and that's why I'm happy that I was able to talk about the movie with Anthony Chen directly. So I hope that you will like this interview as much as I do. If you're interested maybe in Anthony Chen's social media, I will leave everything in the description box below, so don't forget to check it out. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Without further ado, let's get started with the interview. So we can directly start with the introduction and let's talk about you. So for the one who just discovered you, can you tell us a bit more about you and just introduce yourself?
I'm Anthony Chen. I'm a filmmaker from Singapore. I grew up in Singapore, and then lived in London for 15 years. Now I recently moved back to Asia again. Um, I've made a couple of films. My first feature film was Ilo Ilo, which premiered in Cannes and won the Camera d'Or. And then I made a second film in Singapore called Wet Season. Um, I should mention that the the two actors in these two films are the same actors. In my first film, Ilo Ilo, Yo Yan Yan and Ko Jala, they played mother and son. In my second film, they played teacher and student. And then I made a third film. Actually, last year I made two films. Last year was a very productive year for me. I made two films which premiered this year in 2023. One film is my first English language film. It's called Drift. It was shot mostly in Greece and some parts in the UK, and that premiered in Sundance in January this year. And then I had my fourth film called The Breaking Ice. It's also my first film um, made in mainland China. And this premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in May.
Yeah, we will talk about that like later in the episode, but I'm very happy to have you here. So, first of all, thank you for accepting the invitation because I saw like the lineup at the Cannes Festival at the time. And when I saw your movie, I was like, oh, this one. And that's why I remember I asked you on Instagram if the movie will be available in France like in the year. That's why, because when I saw like the poster, I knew that I would like this movie because I really love the actors, Zhu Dongyu and Chu Chu Xiao.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know less. I don't really know Liu Haoyan. I don't know him that much.
But now you discover him through the film.
That's right, and I really he's my favorite character, but we will talk about that later. So okay, and maybe it's kind of a general question, but it's kind of interesting to ask it is why did you choose to become a director, or in general, why the movie industry?
This is very interesting. I think when I was at school, in secondary school, I had no idea I was going to become a film director.
Okay.
I was involved in theater. Um, I was acting on stage at a very young age from about 10, 11 years old. I did that for about 10 years. Um, and I always thought, oh, my future might be in theater. But, when I was in secondary school, when I was like 13, 14, in Singapore, because we are British colony, so, we have basically, after our independence, very much our education system was a leftover system by the British. So,
Okay.
in secondary school in Singapore, in high school, you have to do English literature. And in literature, you have to do Shakespeare. So Macbeth and Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet and all that. And I remember I was struggling so much with Shakespeare. Like I find the text so dense and it was written in English that I couldn't connect with. And I feel like I didn't get him, he didn't get me. Um, and of course it's different now. Now I really um like Shakespeare. But at that time, as a 14-year-old, I was struggling with it. And I was thinking myself, if one can't, you know, get or connect with the world's greatest dramaturg, playwright, like how do you pursue a career in theater? So I was thinking like, okay, so what else? And at about 14, 15, that was when, I discovered a lot of foreign films. I discovered the French Nouvelle Vague, the French New Wave. I discovered Taiwanese films. I discovered like the Japanese director Ozu, and it just changed the whole shape and color of what I think cinema was. You have to remember that growing up in the 80s, 90s in Singapore, you're very, very much growing up on a diet of very, very commercial cinema. You have got, and my dad likes to watch action films. So you're looking at Arnold Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, Hollywood films, Terminator, Die Hard 1, 2, 3, 4, from the US. And also very commercial sort of genre from Hong Kong. So you've got a lot of action films from Hong Kong. My dad loves Jackie Chan and a lot of Hong Kong comedies. You've got the vampire films. That's so when I discovered these other films, it just changed my whole perspective of wow, like this is completely different. It smelled different. It felt different. It looked different. Yeah, and I told myself, yeah, maybe if I can't, become a theater director, maybe I can become a film director. And I remember at 15, I went on to an online forum, and I bought a second-hand camcorder. At the time, you still needed to use tapes. It was a hi-8 tapes, and I buy, like the videotapes and put it in. I still remember I bought it for about $800 Singapore dollars, and it was secondhand. I met this guy randomly outside a McDonald's. I gave him the cash. He gave me, this video camcorder, and I started using that to shoot and capture my classmates over a 1 year period. Literally an entire year from January to December when I was 16. And at the end, I bought a book. I remember the book was like Adobe Premiere for Dummies, and I teach myself video editing, and I started to edit this whatever you call it, this documentary film or whatever it is about my classmates. And eventually, yeah, it was about 37, 40 minutes. I think that's the first thing I've ever done.
Okay. So it's kind of the you were quite ahead in vlogging, kind of.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I wouldn't even, now that you mention it, I was like, oh, that's called vlogging. I wouldn't even it wouldn't occur to me that, oh, I was actually doing vlogging at that time, and I was doing that, and then applied to film school at a very young age. I applied to film school at 17. At that time, there was only one film school. It was a 3-year course in film and video at Ngee Polytechnic. They had a School of Film and Media Studies, and I applied there with this film, and this was my application film.
Oh, okay. So you studied in Singapore?
Yes, that's right. Because it was so expensive then to study abroad. I still remember when I was 15, 16, I did this very naive thing of you know, I bought this book, which is about all the different film schools around the world, and I started writing letters to all these film schools, emails, like to NYU, to Columbia, to UCLA, to the NFTS, to everywhere. And I was like, oh, how do you get into your school? How do you become a filmmaker? And I realized that, oh, it's so expensive. Film school, like that 4 years could cost you what, 200,000 US. At that time in Singapore, you could literally buy a flat.
Mm.
It was very expensive. I didn't come from a very poor family, but I didn't come from a very affluent family. We are sort of like middle class, the lower middle class maybe. The family that you see in Ilo Ilo, that's the kind of family that I grew up in. Um, and that was when I was thinking, oh, what if I haven't got the talent? Is are we gonna loan money from the bank, or am I gonna use my parents' savings just to study film school? What if I don't have that talent? It's so expensive. So I was looking at options online. I still remember there wasn't even Google at that time, on the internet. It was Yahoo. And I used Yahoo to search, and I found this film school in Singapore.
Okay.
I made this film and I applied to it and I got it.
Mm. You talked about like Hong Kongese movie and Japanese like movies. So can you tell us a bit more maybe about maybe your favorite movie or your favorite director, or in general some artist that inspires you?
I have an all-time favorite film, and it's not just my all-time favorite Asian film. It's my all-time favorite film. It's a Taiwanese film by the late Taiwanese director called Edward Young. Um, and the film is called A Brighter Summer Day. It's a very long
Okay.
film. It's 4 hours, but it's an absolute masterpiece. I don't think it's been seen enough. I don't think it's been discovered enough by a lot of people around the world. But I think it's a real masterpiece, and I think it's the one of the best films ever made. And it's the first role that the Taiwanese actor Zhang Zhen was in. I
Oh,
think he
okay.
was 16 or 15 at that time.
Okay. And do you have a more recent movie that you really liked, maybe? A more recent one?
A recent film that I liked. Um, I really like Koreeda's new film, Monster.
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah,
It's in Geneva next week. I'm planning to go there to watch it.
yeah. It's it's one of his strongest films, and it's so heartbreaking, and it's so well made and so well directed. I saw it at the world premiere in Cannes, and it's one of my favorite films that I saw at the festival this year, and it stays with me, and I'm very moved by it.
Okay. I will try to check it out at the Geneva Festival next week. So general question, because before we go into like your work, how would you define, to someone who just discovered you, for example, how would you define your work in general?
Oh, that's a really tough question. I would say my films are very humanistic. Um, my films are always centered around the very delicate and complex relationships between people. Um, I would say I'm a very subtle, restrained, gentle sort of filmmaker as well. You know, I I I like to think that, my cinema is not one that is, loud um and noisy, one that is trying to sort of, punch the message into your face. I think um, my cinema is one which is an observation of life, an observation, a reflection, a discovery of the human condition and our universal humanity.
Mm. And actually, it's a good transition to Ilo Ilo, your movie that was like that won the Camera d'Or in 2013. I watched it like a few years ago actually, and I think it's a good introduction to that. So maybe for the one who haven't seen the movie yet, I know it's available in France, like in Canal Plus. I don't know if you know that.
And also for people that still have DVDs, there are DVDs available.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
because
So,
it was distributed in France 10 years ago.
oh, great. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, can you tell just a little bit about the movie for the one who don't know the movie?
Ilo Ilo is set during 1997, during the Asian financial crisis, and it talks about um, a middle class family in Singapore, um, with two working parents, and a young 10-year-old boy, and how, because they are at work, they have to hire a Filipino nanny, a Filipino helper from the Philippines, to take care of him. And it talks about this blossoming sort of changing relationship between this maid and the 10-year-old boy, set against a period of despair, a period of economic recession.
Mm. Yeah, I really liked the movie, and the ending was quite impactful. I really liked it. So, if some our listeners haven't seen the movie yet, I really recommend you the movie. No, it was in 2013 when you won the Camera d'Or. 10 years has passed. Do you have, how do you see this now that 10 years are passed? Does winning the Camera d'Or change your career? Of course, it changed it, but in what ways? And yeah, yeah, that's pretty much it for now.
Well, yeah, I think the first film really sort of like made my career, I would say. Like it made myself known to a lot of people around the world. The film was widely distributed. It was distributed, apart from France. And it did pretty well in France, like it crossed over like 100,000 admissions in France and cinemas. Um, and it was um also distributed in 30 countries around the world. It did very, very well in Singapore. It's until now, I think it's still the highest grossing art house film in Singapore. Um, and I think it also, all of a sudden, because it made my career, and it also meant that it was easier later on to find resources, to find funding for my films. I After this film, I also started my own company where I produce a lot of first-time filmmakers from Singapore and from the region. I champion a lot of young filmmakers and young voices, um, and it's allowed me to do that. It's interesting, I think 10 years on, I did, it feels different now because when I won the Camera d'Or, I was 29. I was in my 20s, Now I'm 39, I'm turning 40 next year. I feel much older now. And I feel like I'm slowly walking into my midlife and maybe a midlife crisis. Um, which is why which is why I think I had a real existential crisis, like during the pandemic. And my latest film, The Breaking Eyes, in a way, um, I think it was a very good turning point for me. Yeah. Because I felt like my soul was older. I felt like, I was making work, or I was thinking in, a certain way, and I felt I needed to break out of the mold. I felt I needed to um um find a new way to sort of grow. I needed to learn new things. And I
Mm.
think the whole process, or the whole idea of wanting to make The Breaking Ice, or process of making it, and eventually the film itself, yeah, did help change me in a certain way.
And for, it's more like a general question, but it's in like, it's also about Ilo Ilo. How do you choose the theme for each of your movies? Is it like some kind of idea that you have when you are walking?
So it's quite interesting, like I feel like I don't go and find, actively go and find my teams, or
Okay.
look at, like, oh, the next film I want to make is on this. But with Ilo Ilo, it was very, very personal. Like I went to film school twice. I went to 3-year film school in Singapore, and then later on, I did my master's in film directing at the National Film and Television School in the UK, 2 years. And when I graduated from film school, I've made a lot of short films. I've made about 8 to 9 short films. And I knew I wanted to embark and I wanted to move on to make my first feature film. And at that time, I didn't know what it's going to be. But at night, when I was sleeping, I kept having dreams. I kept having dreams of um, my childhood, and when I was growing up, I had a Filipino maid helper that worked in our household for 8 years. When she came, I was 4 years old. When she left, I was 12 years old. And all of a sudden, like a lot of scenes or a lot of memories from my childhood came into my head, and I began to look at it differently. As a child, there were a lot of things you didn't understand, whether it's a tension between the helper and the mother and all that. But all of a sudden, as an adult, when you look back on childhood, you see things that you never saw before. Like you observe things, and and I didn't know exactly what story it's gonna be, but I knew I needed to make a film about this.
Mm. So it's kind of from your own experience, kind of.
Yeah, I think, and sometimes it's from my own experience. Sometimes it's from stuff that I've been reading, and it just caught my eye, and it just stayed with me for so long, and you keep thinking about it. Like for me, filmmaking is an obsession. Like you are either obsessed by a character, an issue, a subject matter, something, and until I finally understand it, and the process of understanding it is by discovering it, by writing about it, by observing it, by capturing it, by making it into a film, by editing. And at the end, until you completely comprehend and understand it, you just can't let it go. You can't let it out of your head. And for me, it's an obsession. And every film for me, is always driven by that sort of obsession. And it's always an emotional one.
Mm. It's kind of at the same time you're making a movie, but at the same time you are like solving problem.
Yeah, I think it's not about solving the problems as in practical problems. I think
Yeah.
it's more of figuring out, why is my character like that?
Mm.
What is she feeling? What is he feeling? Like, what they're gonna do now? Like it's about figuring out. For me, it's always driven by characters. It's always driven by emotions. It's less about um just solving things. For me, it's about discovering more than solving,
Mm.
because for me, everything is always already there, but it's about discovering and understanding it. It's not
Yeah.
like, it's not like, oh, this is a problem and it's about you finding a way to figure it out. Because like for me, humanity, the human condition, it's always been there, but it's about finding out why. Like, why are they doing this to one another? Like, what does this character really want? What is that pain, that suffering deep inside, like this human being?
Mm. That's why each of your movie are very not art wrenching, but more, how do you say that, accurate in the emotion. Like it's easier to identify, I guess, to certain character. And in general, question is, how do you want your movie to affect people? Obviously, I guess with the character, you want to in some way try to convince certain emotion through each characters, but either like a more deeper meaning.
um I don't know. I'm always hoping that my work would move audiences. I think it's, I always hope that there is emotion in my film, and I'm always hoping that this emotion reaches the audience, or they connect with it. For me, it's less about issues, you know. For me, I never make films because like, oh, this is the moral of the story, you know, like, you know, we shouldn't do this or we should do this, you know. It's never about being didactic. It's never about morality. It's never about, you know, for me, the way I capture my characters, it's all about being human. And this is what it is. You know, I'm sharing a shared experience. I'm sharing a certain human flaw, a vulnerability, and hopefully, yeah, it lets you look at yourself, you know, your own inner self in a new light.
Yeah, that's right. I was kind of reflecting on myself after, for example, the Breaking Ice and Ilo Ilo.
Right.
And just before going to the Breaking Ice, we can maybe just talk a little bit about Wet Season, the second movie that was in 2019. So for the one who haven't seen the movie yet, can you just tell us a little bit about it?
So Wet Season is about a Malaysian teacher, a woman, you know, in her early 40s. She has moved to Singapore to teach Chinese. Unfortunately, it's a subject that is neglected now by schools and by the students. It's not something that you know it's a priority. And you know, she married a Singapore man. It's about her, you know, a 40-year-old woman in crisis, you know, her struggling in her marriage, you know, at work, and how this female teacher ends up having a bond with her 16-year-old student that she teaches. And it's a very, very complex bond. And eventually, I think it's a coming of age for both of them, you know. The boy has grown up through this process, um and Ling, you know, like this female teacher has learned to um yeah, put down and rediscover and you know, her own place in the world again.
Mm. I saw in an interview that you talked about the fact that, as you said previously, that Chinese is less and less not used but learned in Singapore. That it was a real issue for Singapore because it's for a big part of the population is kind of their history.
Yeah.
So it was important to like learn Chinese. And for Ilo Ilo as well, I saw in an interview that you talked about the fact that the Filipino maid is immigrant. So I can see a trend in your movie when you talk about character first, but you also try to picture maybe some social issues in Singaporean society and in general. Actually, it can apply to every society. So can you tell us a bit more about this? Like social issues seems very important to you.
It's interesting because I, you know, like when I make a film, I never start with the social issues. You know, I start with the characters, you know, whether it's a Ilo Ilo or whether it's a Wet Season. I always start with the individual, you know, like when I understand who this person is, what's the problem with this person, you know, what does this person really want in life, and then the rest of the individual characters. So and then I move on to their relationships. So um the relationship between one character and another character. It might be mother and son, father and son, you know, um, um, mother and father, husband and wife. And then I get these relationships right. And then it's the next layer. You know, I try and get their domestic life right. And then their life at work, at school. And when I get all these other characters right, you know, you start to realize that it's like an onion, you know, like as you get the core, the individual, and then the interpersonal relationships, and then the relationships and what's happening at work, at school, and you build and build, and all of a sudden you get a portrait of not just a family, but a society and a country. And when you have a very accurate, well observed portrait of that, you know, the issues would just fall into place because it's always been there, you know. So it's not about like me saying like, I want to make a film about this issue. I feel it's very important that it's always driven by the characters, and then the characters and um and their connection with the other characters, and it grows and grows and grows.
Mm. Okay, so it expands, and after like the issue kind of arise by themselves naturally.
Yeah, I think so. Of course, subconsciously there will be certain issues and ideas that's spinning in my head, right? But how do you make a film about an issue? Like, I want to
Mm.
make a film about loneliness. Like, how do you make it tangible? Or how do you make a film about, oh, I want to make a film about migrant labor? Like, you can't make a film about that, but you can make a film about how it feels to have someone living with you and to building a connection, and then this person have to leave. You can make a film about heartbreak. You can make a film about like that relationship between people.
So it's kind of a transition to the breaking ice, actually, that we can directly go into that part. The breaking ice, as you said previously, was at the Cannes Festival in 2023. Now it will be available in France starting the 22nd of November in theater.
Yeah.
I've seen it when I was at the Zurich Festival, and just for the one who haven't seen the movie yet, maybe to give them like some, like to incite them to watch it. Can you tell us a bit more about the breaking ice shortly?
So it's really about three young people in their 20s, who are sort of lost and broken, like in their lives. And they start to, there are these three strangers that they start to bond, over a couple of days in the winter in China. And eventually they find warmth and solace in one another. And this bond doesn't last very long. Eventually they go back into their individual lives. But that few days, like has, given them some kind of hope um to take that next step in life, to move
Mm.
on in their individual lives.
Yeah, actually, the movie felt for me like some kind of floating moments, some kind of break when you concentrate on the present, because we know that for younger generation and everyone in general, the future is something that is very concerning for a lot of us. And in the movie, it's more like being in the present and not very obsessing about any issues, any problem or the future. So it felt more like a floating moment when you take time to be in the present, kind of a contemplative way of things. That's why I really liked it, and we'll talk about it a bit later. But just before we go into it, can you just tell us a bit more about the title? Why did you choose The Breaking Ice?
So we started with the Chinese title. The Chinese title actually is different from um
Okay.
the English title. The Chinese title is called Ran Dong. Ran in Chinese means burning, and Dong means winter, so it's burning winter. But I didn't feel that that title sounded so good in English, so I came up with an English title when I was making the film. And we all know this sort of like English idiom, right? Ice breaking,
Yeah.
icebreaker. Like whenever you go to university, the first week is ice breaking week. It's when the ice melts between strangers. Is when you start to know one another properly. And I thought, oh, that works so well, because I want the idea of ice in this title, because ice is a recurring motif, a metaphor in the film. And so I thought, okay, but I'm not gonna call the film The Icebreaker because it sounds off. So I decided that I'll call it The Breaking Ice.
Yeah, okay. You filmed in like one of the coldest part in China in winter. So the ice has kind of some very important meaning, isn't it?
Yeah, when I decided that I wanted to make a winter film, and it was indeed very cool, like we film in this region called Yanbian, which is on the border with the Korean peninsula. So it's where China meets Korea.
Mhm.
And this city called Yanji, and and I lost my train of thought. What was I gonna say? What was your
The
question
meaning of
again?
ice. The meaning
Oh
of
yeah.
ice.
So and when I decided that I wanted to make a winter film, I was thinking um that in winter the first thing you think of is snow, right? But I feel like snow has been overly shot in films. It's almost like overly romanticized in cinema. So I was thinking like what else? And I thought about ice, you know, um and I kept thinking about the process of how ice forms, from water for it to solidify into ice. It's a very quick process. It could take 2, 3 hours in a freezer. It could be overnight when the temperature drops. A frozen lake could just freeze. Um, and and then when you take this ice, you put it on the surface, it almost starts melting right away. So it's such a transient process. And I wanted to use this to describe this relationship of these three people where, you know, they come together so quickly, they bond together and develop this complex sort of relationship in a very quick time. But at the same time, it also melts away very quickly. It starts and ends really quickly. But what is left? It's the emotion, it's the memories that allow each of them to move on in their separate lives.
Okay. And the maze as well, all the imagery of the maze, the ice. It's more like there is several way of seeing the movie, I guess. Like you can just watch it the first time is it is about like just listening to the character talking. But if you pay attention to all the details that you put in the movie, sometimes like there are some words written at the back, like when they are eating ramen and at the back it's
Yeah,
written or aini, for example, or
yeah.
stuff like that. It's very I really like that there are several way of seeing the movie, and there are like some little details that you might miss it if you watch it the first time, but you will get it at the second time, and it has more depth to the general movie.
I think it is. I think it's a film that is very central. It's a film that is very atmospheric. Of
Mm.
all my films, like I said, earlier, just now, this film is sort of a departure from the style of of my work before. My work before has been very naturalistic, has been very grounded in a kind of social realism. But this film, I would say it's so much more dreamy. You can even interpret like this few days as an entire dream. It can feel surreal at moments. And there's even magical realism in it.
Yeah, and the music as well helps to create some kind of dreamy atmosphere. I really like the use of ambient kind of music. In some places, sometimes you put some music, but it's not all the time, so it gives some space to life, breathing, very like accompanying the characters. I really like the OST, by the way. I found it on Spotify and I really liked it.
Yeah, it's a young composer who's also from Singapore. When we started working on this film, he was only 26. He was very young. Um, I connected with him because I discovered his music. I connected with him when I was living in London. And I knew when I wanted to make this film that I wanted lots of music in this film, but I wanted the voice of youth. I wanted someone that was young that could really um bring out a lot of the emotions and the complexity of those emotions in this film. And I brought him on, and in fact it's the first time this musician has scored for a feature film.
Mm.
And it was such a lovely process. He was involved very early on. So when I was shooting the film, I'll be cutting and putting the scenes together. I'll be sending it to him, and he'll be writing music. He'll be sending it back to me. So I was very motivated by his music when I was shooting as well.
And just I'm curious about like the creation process of the movie. Like, you said, if I remember correctly in an interview, you said that for Ilo Ilo in White Season, it took you several years of work. And I wanted to know if is it different for Breaking Ice? How much time did it take to make
I think with
the
the
Breaking
Breaking
Ice?
Ice, it was slightly different because it was a film that it wasn't about me sort of like, spending the time, like deciding everything on the page, and then everyone just comes in and fill the pages,
Mm-hmm.
just everyone just comes in and follows what I dictate, like this is the plan and you just follow. Like with the Breaking Ice, it was more organic. I had uh an idea. I want to make about young people. I knew it's going to be set over a couple of days. I knew it's going to be winter. And I casted the actors before I finished the entire script. So I knew who I was writing for. And I was allowing the spaces, the locations, a lot of the detail of the scenes I wrote after I've been to the north of China, after I discovered a lot of stuff. There was a
Mm-hmm.
scene inside the park,
Yeah.
where they go into a park at night and there were animals, there were monkeys and there was deer. But I discovered that park when I was location scouting for Nana's apartment. Um I didn't have that written, at first, but we are looking for this apartment, so we made appointments with different sort of property agents to view apartments, and in between there was time, and I said to my producer, like there's a park nearby, it looks pretty nice. Let's take a walk in a park and let's look at how the local people live. I
Mm-hmm.
was going inside, looking for people, but I found animals. And I was like, this is so surreal in the middle of the city. And then there's all these animals. And I said, I'm gonna write this into the film.
I really like the scene at the park with the statue, the different statue that you choose. I really like this scene.
Sadly, now if you go back to that park, they have um reconstructed that part of the park. So they've
Okay.
moved all the animals away to
Oh,
somewhere else. So it's no longer there. The animals are no longer there.
and I read in an interview that when you were creating the movie, like you were writing the script, like it was during middle of COVID, and you wrote the script in 10 days. Is it right?
Well, technically, I didn't write it in 10 days, like um, the script wasn't written in 10 days. The script was finished 10 days before we started filming.
Oh, okay. That's a slight difference.
That's a huge difference. It took a couple of weeks and like yeah, to write the script. It wasn't like I wouldn't know how to write the script in 10 days.
Okay. And I wanted to ask you another question is like the movie was chosen for the Singapore entry for the Oscar in 2024. So can you tell us about how do you feel about that?
I always feel like, it's a good honor to be selected to be represented at the Oscars. Um, but this is also not the first time, I've had a film that's an Oscar submission. 10 years ago there was Ilo Ilo, and then there was my second film, Wet Season, as well. So well, yeah, I think it's a good thing and it's an honor, but I don't think so much these days. I'm not going like, oh, it's gonna get nominated. It will, I just feel yeah, I've done this a few times already, and it's good that the film is being recognized. It's good that hopefully it also helps more audiences to discover this film.
And I will try my best to promote it when it's like available in France because I really liked it and I guess that a lot of my listeners will like the movie. I really loved it. And you said that previously the movie is about three characters who are kind of a little bit lost in their lives. And in general, I thought maybe in an interview that you said that it was more about younger generations, love letter to younger generation. Is that right?
I would say that, a lot of this film also emerged out of a lot that I was reading during the pandemic. I read a lot of articles about young people um, in China and also around the world, and that feeling of feeling lost, feeling stuck, um, feeling anxious, um, and feeling let down by the previous generation, by their parents' generation, by the establishment, by the government, by the employers, and like as I read more and more, and first it was articles and it was blogs, and I was watching vlogs as well. But I think maybe because it was the pandemic that actually pushed even more young people to want to express themselves. Maybe because it was very stressful and lonely at the time. But what I felt, about this generation, um, is that there seemed to be this collective melancholy.
Hmm.
Um, you know, yeah, and I wanted to capture this, because I myself as a filmmaker, I was feeling very depressed during the pandemic. Cinemas closed for so long. I was just sitting at home. I was not working, and somehow I connected a lot with these feelings, and I wanted to um, make this film to capture this emotion that I was feeling. But I don't think it's in the end, I'm a optimist, which is why if you look at the end of the film, no, it's not a big Hollywood happy ending, but I always hope that, people find hope. And I always believe that there's light at the end of the tunnel. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm just hoping with this film, you asked me like, oh, what do you hope people will get out of, like my films? But with this film in particular, I'm just hoping, whether audiences out there, especially young audiences, if you ever feel, lonely, if you ever feel depressed, if you ever feel lost, you're not alone.
And it will pass eventually. Especially with the character of Haofeng. I really, really like this character in particular because maybe it was the more extreme, not extreme, but maybe feeling the more extreme feelings, like the not I don't know, maybe depression. And for example, the scene where he's at the club and he's crying, this feeling of loneliness while being surrounded by so many people. I feel that this scene very hits, and I really love this scene. It was very, very deep and yeah, very accurate, I guess. This is my favorite scene, I guess, from the movie.
That's great because that was the intention, like I feel loneliness is not about you sort of like um pulling the curtains, turning off all the lights, and just wrapping yourself in bed at home. I think a lot of times real loneliness is when you're out about in a city. It's so noisy, it's so buzzy, it's so crowded, and yet you feel so empty and lonely and lost. I think that is true loneliness.
Mm, yeah, and I felt it. I really especially like Hao Feng actually, but it's interesting because each character has their own background. You can see that Hao Feng is more like struggling with mental health. We have Nana who is more like uh struggling to maybe give up on her dreams. And the last character who is more like lost in his life because there is some allusion to the fact that he didn't like study or anything and he doesn't know what he want to do. So you have different backgrounds that each one of us we can identify to. But it's interesting because no matter which path they took, studying hard, not studying, giving up on your dream, they all end up in the same place, this place where they're feeling lost and they are taking a break from their life to kind of figure things out and trying comfort and getting comfort from each one. But you said that the feeling of loneliness, even though you are like surrounded, and I felt it in the scene in the bathroom when Hao Feng is in with Nana and there is a curtain between the two of them. as if they were trying to connect to each other's, and the end is still like crossing the curtain, but still there is some kind of barrier or something. I don't know if I understood it correctly.
I think, you know, a lot of stuff in this film, you know, a lot of scenes in this film is open to interpretation. Um, and I think depending on, you know, your own sort of emotional experience, you know, you would also feel the film in a different way. But I have to say the shower scene is one of my favorite scenes. And like when I was writing the script, when I was shooting the film, and even now, every time I watch the film, like it's a scene that moves me a lot.
I really liked it as well. I wanted to ask, yeah, about like the fact that you said that younger generation are kind of struggling these days. I really like that there is an allusion to the Tamping movement, the lying down movement in China. It's especially like it's named Tamping in China, but actually we have that everywhere in the world. But in China, it's called the Tamping movement, like the lying down movement.
What would you use to describe it in French? How
Mm,
do you express it? Like not camping, but this feeling that, you know, young people maybe in
exhaustion,
exhaustion.
or maybe hopelessness, because
Yeah, yeah.
most of the time the older generation will say, oh, it's laziness, but I don't think it's laziness. It's more like the fact that you don't see kind of any future. Actually, the future is not that bright, and you kind of feel overwhelmed by all the things younger generation have been through: COVID, many wars, recession, stuff like that. So it's kind of sometimes younger generation and ecology as well, the future for our planet. So it kind of, yeah, it's kind of an exhaustion of as well of work. In China, you have the Jojo Liu, the 99 to 6 7 out of 6 day per week. So it's, I think it's all of a lot of things at the same time. It's the work situation, the world situation, the society situation, and I will qualify it as maybe exhaustion or hopelessness.
It's quite interesting that you say that because you know I wasn't born in the 90s or the 2000s, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
I'm not Generation Z, you know, I was born in the 80s. So, you know, my ethic is always like, you know, being very hardworking and I don't complain, I just keep charging on. So interestingly, when I was reading a lot about Tang Ping, when I was reading a lot about, you know, some of the movements that we are discussing, you know, I was skeptical at the start. You know, I was a bit like, these young people, they're just lazy. You know, like you said, it's lazy, right? But the more I tried to understand it, the more I tried to discover it, the more I tried to um really feel what's going on. And that's the thing, you know, it's that sense of hopelessness, you know, and I think it's very, very hard, extremely hard to grow up in the internet um age, in the internet generation, you know, like when I was growing up, I had the internet only when I was 12, you know, like I had my first email when I was 12 and everything was brand new, you know, there wasn't like WhatsApp and Facebook and, you know, like there wasn't all that stuff at then. It was still a more innocent sort of like internet age. But now I think it's very, very stressful to grow up in a world where you're constantly bombarded with information. You know, you're constantly bombarded with news. You know, like in the past, if you're bullied at school, it's, you know, like, oh, you know, like the next year you change a class and then you forget about this person, you move on with your life. But now, if you're bullied or abused on the internet, it stays there forever. You know, you're haunted by it forever. You know, you can't remove it. You know, it's like the same with the news, you know, like, you know, when something bad happens, you have to deal with it every day. It's not like in the past where, oh, you have to wait for the newspaper to come, you have to wait for, you know, before. So there is time for you to digest things. There's time for you to deal with your emotions. But now you have to deal with up and downs, you know, in split seconds and split minutes. I think it's really tough. And because yes, you know, they would say like, oh, you know, this is this is the age where people don't need to work as hard because there's so much technology. But because of technology, everything becomes so quick that in the past, you would, like write up a document, you send it by post, and then it takes a couple of days before it comes back, and then you continue following up on it. But now, at midnight, you might get a text, and then you have to continue working. You have to deal with an issue right away. Like, it doesn't stop. I think now I actually have a lot of empathy, I think, for this generation. I think, like, when are you able to pause? When are you able to stop? And it doesn't help that everything has become so unaffordable, when, like in previous generations, like, a house was cheaper. You could buy one house and you could buy another holiday house, and you can have this and that. And you can slowly grow stuff. But now everything is so expensive. It's very hard to even dream of owning things, to dream of having that same kind of security and comfort that the parents have. So yeah, I really hope that um, you know, a film like that would speak to the young audiences as well, because as we always know, right, whenever there's a film in Cannes, it's always seen as art house. It's always seen as, oh, maybe it's difficult to watch, it's for old people. But I'm really hoping that a film like this, like I said, you said, I said that it's a love letter to young people, but it is, for me, it's a love letter to young people. And I'm hoping that instead of the regular, older art house audiences, that hopefully there would be young audiences that discover the film, that come and they feel like, hey, there is something out there that is speaking to us, and I'm not going to pretend that this film has got answers. I don't believe that you can watch a film and it solves your problems and it heals you completely. But like I said, at least hoping that when people, discover this film, that they know that um, somewhere out there, someone actually cares.
Mm. Actually, for me, it was more like feeling understood, kind of, because I especially identify more to Hao Feng. It was more like a character that I was connecting with, and I guess like the people who watch the movie will identify to one of the three characters. But yeah, especially I guess the more like heart wrenching one, or the more with the raw feelings, was Hao Feng for me, at least, because it was the more like moody one, melancholic one, sad one. So I guess, yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to add something like for the movie. I really like the general cinematography, and I know that you in the team that you work with, one of the cinematographer was Yu Jinping, who worked
There was only
in
one cinematographer.
yeah,
So Yu Jinping, she's from Taiwan, and
yeah,
she worked with Zhou Dongyu, the actress, also on Better Days.
Better Days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really love this movie as well, and I found like the scene where there are three on the motorcycle. Is it some kind of a reference to Better Days or not at all?
Not at all, not at all. And
Okay.
also, I wrote the motorcycle bit because um the actor, with the short crop hair, Chu Xiao, he loves motorcycles. So on the
Okay.
weekends, he would, like, he's a motorcycle, and he would go to the um 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 the suburban areas in Beijing, and he would be on his riding on his motorbike, and that's why I wrote it into the film.
Okay. And maybe do you have a last word about the Breaking Ice? Maybe for the one who haven't seen the movie yet.
No, I would say come see the film wherever you are in the world. It's it's opening in Hong Kong next week on the 9th of November. It opens in France on 22nd November. I think it opens in Switzerland in February.
Yeah, it's a bit later.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's a bit later next year. It's opening in different places all over the world. But particularly, yeah, I'm hoping that French audiences will be able to see it in France. And like I said, it's not just a film for your um cinephiles and art house sort of like audiences. I think it's a film that would speak to the younger generation, and it's a film that was made for the younger generation. So I hope that they would come and discover it.
Yeah, and just one thing that I thought about that made me think quite a lot is the thing when they are looking because there is like a guy who is wanted, and like there is kind of a sum of money on his head, and one of the characters says, "Oh, he's worth way more money than me," and this sentence make me think because I was like, "Oh, that it's hard, like that's true," and I was thinking about this sentence like quite for a while actually. It's kind of interesting because you start to think of like the value that you put in certain things, what you value and what you don't value, the money that you put in certain things, and I started to think about that.
Yeah.
Do you have a special meaning behind that?
I don't think I want to go too deep to talk about this, but I intentionally wrote that line. I have to say that. And it's interesting how, like you said, like how we put a value to, what are you worth? What's your value in life? And I think it's very interesting. And the fact that this convict or this, person on the loose, is worth so much more than um, you know, like a young person here. And yeah, I think it's open to interpretation, but it was intentional. I would say like every line in the film it's intentional. Um, yeah, but um, yeah, but I think one should interpret it, yeah, themselves. And I think you have found your own way into this film, and in a way, I'm quite happy about that because I know, for example, when in China, um, a lot of people are grappling with, they're struggling to connect with Hao Feng. They're like, why does this person have depression? Like, why does she cry? I think if you just try and bring a lot of logic to try and try and find just logic in everything, but a lot of our life is devoid of logic, in a way, whether it's anxiety or mental illness or depression. If you could explain all of it, like there wouldn't be these problems.
Yeah.
So I especially am moved that you connected with his character, because his character, I purposefully wrote this character because I felt like there were a lot of young people that were, in different ways, in varying ways, right? But that were struggling um, um, with issues, um, and yeah, I wanted to, um, yeah, put a young person that you see, oh, has made some money, seems to be quite successful, seems to be doing okay with life, but he's not happy. Yeah, but he's not fulfilled, but he's struggling to even find peace within himself. Um, and for me, that's important.
I think I will rewatch it when it's available in France, 22nd. I will rewatch it once again because I really love this movie actually. I guess it's one of my favorites. I don't have that many favorites, but this one I guess will be on my top 3
Great.
from now on. Yeah, yeah. I kind of like raw feelings movie. My favorite one is Decision to Live.
Yeah.
Park Chan-wook.
Yeah.
This is my favorite one ever. So The Breaking Ice will be on my top 3 from now on.
And also we're talking about film titles, right? So it has a
Yeah.
different Chinese title, it's a different English title, and it has a different French title.
French title.
Which
Yeah.
until now I don't really know how to pronounce.
French is kind of hard, but the translation is A Winter in Yanjin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
on hiver et Yanji, I think.
yeah. Un hiver à Yanji.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think that's pretty much it for the breaking ice. Do you have anything that you want to add? Or we can go maybe to the last part.
No, I think that's fine.
Okay, so quickly, just a little question. Are you working maybe on another project, or do you have another a character that you would like to talk about in the future movie?
Um, I shot 2 films last year, so
Yeah,
I've
Drift
been very
in.
busy. I've been quite exhausted as well because
Yeah.
this year I've been promoting the film. Last year I've been shooting and in post-production for a very long time. Next year I'm preparing a new film that I'm shooting back home in Singapore. It's with the same 2 actors in my first film and my second film, Ilo Ilo and Wet Season, with the actress Yo Yan Yan and the actor Ko Jala. They played mother and son in my first film, teacher and student in my second film, and I'm making the third and final part of my growing up trilogy. Because this boy that I discovered 10 years ago, when he was 11 years old, he has turned 21. He's a proper adult now. So he's grown up, and I'm gonna capture his coming of age, um, um, his adulthood, in this new film called We Are All Strangers. And I think it's a very moving story. The two of them are gonna be leads. I'm not gonna say too much about the film. I would say, the short premise is it's about strangers forced to become a family.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's a moving family drama, and it's gonna be uh like a closure um to the 2 films that I made before.
And just for Drift, do you think that it will be available in France?
I don't know yet if Drift is opening in America on February 9,
Okay.
and then it's gonna slowly open in other places. It's also very, very different from all my previous films. It's about an African Liberian refugee, um, and because of a huge tragedy, finds herself drifting on the shores of a Greek island, and how um, she ends up, bonding and having a connection with a tour guide from America.
Mhm.
It's also, in a way, like there's this recurring sort of motive, all my films is always about this complex and intricate and intimate bonds, between strangers.
Yeah. And just, do you plan to maybe film again in China? Is it something that you would like to do?
I think I would, maybe not so soon. Like I'm developing some ideas. But I would, I think there's a lot of great talent, like whether it's acting talent or in terms of creative talent, in terms of head of departments, in terms of crew. And I would love to make another film in China, but right now I'm also developing a film with a Korean company. I'm
Oh,
developing my first Korean film.
oh wow! I love Korean films as well, so I'm interested in that. I will follow the news when it's out.
Yeah.
And lastly, it's more for me and for the audience. Do you have any Singaporean artists that you would recommend to the audience? I'm a bit curious. I would like to discover more.
I think one or a starting point, since we are talking about the breaking ice today, is I think you can discover the music of the composer Kin Leong. He's very young, he's 28 now. He's on Spotify.
Yeah.
And apart from the soundtrack for Breaking Ice, you'll discover a lot of the music that he has done. He's incredibly talented, and I have a feeling lots of people were like his work. And then there are other filmmakers that are very interesting that have had their films released in France before. There's the Singapore filmmaker called Bu Junfeng. He had his first film in the Critics Week in Cannes called Sandcastle, his second film called apprentice that was in official selection in a certain regard several years ago. There is you know, and both of them, him and also another filmmaker, like we all went to the same film school in Singapore. And then there's Yo Siu Hua. His first film was called A Land Imagined. I can't remember the French title of his film. It won the Golden Leopard in Locarno at the Locarno Film Festival several years ago. So there is talent coming out from this very, very small country called Singapore, and I hope that audiences will slowly discover them. There is another film that maybe you will be interested to check out. It's not available in France, but
Okay.
it's a film that I produce, first time director. Because you are into Korean films, it's a film called Ajuma.
Yeah, I heard about this one. I
Yeah.
was not able to watch it, but I heard a lot about this one.
But it's very interesting. It's a comedy drama, but it's very moving and heartfelt. Yeah. Also by a Singapore director, and it's the first Singapore Korean co-production.
It was at the Busan Festival, isn't it?
So
A few years
last year, and then it
Yeah.
opened in Singapore and in some territories in Asia last year, and it's opening on the 29th of November this year in Korea.
Oh, okay. Okay. I hope that it will be available in France.
I don't think so.
Might be hard.
Just like, like a lot of Korean films are not distributed in France. That
Yeah.
it's very specific. It's either very, very big genre films, or art house films that went to like major festivals.
Or sometimes in festivals.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen it in any French festival so far yet.
Yeah.
Because I try to check every
And
festival.
which part of France are you based in?
Near Lyon.
Oh, near Lyon. I'm coming to Lyon in next week.
Yeah, I know about that. And I was like thinking, should I go there? I was thinking about that.
Lyon, and we have 2 screenings in Lyon.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of live between two countries, like next to Switzerland, but in France.
Yeah, so you can try and get friends in Lyon to come and see it.
Yeah, I can try that. So I think that's pretty much it for the interview. Thank you again for like accepting the invitation.
Great.
And I look forward to see the movie in theater in France. I will do my best to promote it to my audience on Instagram, TikTok, and on the podcast so that as many people as possible can see the movie, because I think that's a very important movie for younger generation. Do you have any word for the listeners, maybe?
No, come see the film. Like
Yeah.
22nd of November, come see the film.
Yeah. Come see the film.
I think if you don't come and see it, you would never know. But I have a feeling most people, if they come and discover the film, I think they would find something they would like about it.
Yeah. It's totally worth it to come and watch it. Totally.
Great.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you
I
so
wish
much.
you a pleasant stay in France.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.